The theory behind decoction mashing is to take a portion of the grain, heat it to boiling, and then adding it back to the main mash to increase the temperature of the main mash. So when you take a decoction out, you take approximately 1/3 of the main mash, or 1 quart per pound of grain used, and you can heat it up on the stove, or like I have a separate burner here, but you want to heat it very slowly and continuously stir to keep it from scorching, because that will make the wort taste bad. Decoction mashing is traditional, and that's why I do it. I'm making a pilsner right now, the old style way of taking some just classic pilsner malt and decocting, boiling some up so it gets a little color on it, and adding it to the mash, which will bring it up to the next rest temperature. But you probably don't have to do that nowadays with modified malts, but I do like to do a traditional beer every now and then. Like I said, this pilsner is for a party I have every 4th of July, and I make it in the winter time and lager it until the summer. So we're going to continuously stir this until it comes to a boil. You don't want it to stick, you don't want to scorch it, but once it comes to a boil, you can leave it boiling for 10 minutes or so, depending on how much color you want on the grain. And then I'm going to add it back to the main mash, which will increase the temperature up to my next mash rest schedule. When stirring the decoction, it's a little thick when you first start doing it, but as it warms up, the sugars start to relax, and the decoction mash here gets a little thinner, and it's much easier to stir. So we're at a boil now, pretty much. Took about 20 minutes or so, I'd say, of constant stirring. You can let it boil for 10 to 30 minutes, however long you want, and the grain will get darker and more sweeter the longer it cooks. Doing a decoction mash will also increase your brewhouse efficiency, because there'll be more sugars for the yeast to eat, so your ABV will be higher in the beer. So we're adding the decoction mash back into the main mash. You can see it's quite a bit darker in color. So this will raise the main mash temperature up because we're putting in 212 degree grain into the lower temperature main mash. After you add all the decoction mash back into the main mash, give it a good stir, make sure there's no temperature variations in it, and get a thermometer reading, see how you did, and then you can let that sit and do another decoction. If you want to bring it up to another step, which would be a double decoction, you can do a third one to raise it another step, which will be a triple decoction. But in between each one, make sure you stir thoroughly and get a good temperature reading. So a sample of the main mash grain is on the left and the decoction mash is on the right. You can see how much more color there is after cooking it in the decoction. So this is now the second decoction. The online calculator said I needed 10 quarts of mash raised to 212 degrees added back into the main mash. Will bring it from 148 to 158. The theory behind decoction mashing is you take the thick mash, which is essentially just the grain and a little bit of water, and boil that. You're not going to kill the enzymes in the mash that do the conversion because they're in the thin portion of the mash, the water and the wort. So you want to grab as thick of a portion of a mash as you can to boil and then add it back into it. I'm using a thinner mash ratio than normal. I'm using 1 3/4 quarts per pound of water to grain. That way there's more liquid for the enzymes to flow into while I pull this thick mash out and boil it. This does take longer than a standard mash of an hour. You know, you want to bring this up to temperature, which takes 20-30 minutes, and then you want to add it into the main mash and let that rest for 20 to 30 minutes, and then pull another decoction, bring that up to temperature, which will take a X amount of time, and then add it back into. So your brew day is longer, but you know, it's fun and you're doing something you enjoy, so why not? But from once the mash is done, the brew day is exactly the same from that point on. So the mash is done. I've brought it up to mash out temperature of 168, and from this point on the brew day is the same. You boil, chill, aerate, and ferment.